Good morning. I'm really glad to be here. And if I appear to be overdressed, it's because I'm cold, right? I want to make sure I stay warm. I am really appreciative of the invitation to be with you and of the fact that on this Saturday morning, you are willing to take your time and efforts and to devote them to your spiritual development. And I'm grateful for the chance to do that with my own life as well. It's funny, when Rodney called me about this topic and mentioned the thing at PTP, I went looking everywhere for the outline that I used there. And I found one document that had a bunch of words that I might use in an outline. That was it. And then I looked for the audio of it, thought maybe I can listen to the audio of it. And the website that I went to said, sorry, we're temporarily down. We'll be up in a few weeks or whatever. And so I don't really remember what I said at PTP. But I'm telling you, the good news about this book right here is that when you take a topic like this, God's man, characteristics that God wants us all to develop, I mean, there's so much material there. You can go everywhere teaching and preaching the word with that. And so I'm sure I'll be bringing some of those things into this. But here's where I wanted to start today, because I started thinking about this more and more. God's man. Where would you go to find a listing of some of God's greatest men and what characteristics they possessed that made them so great? And of course, Hebrews 11 comes to mind, does it not? I want to go to Hebrews 11 with you, because as you are God's man today, and as I attempt to be the same, there's something to learn from these men that we read about here in Hebrews chapter 11. And you know, one thing that I taught for years, and I still teach it because it's in the chapter, is that we ought to obey God and do things He says do in the way He says do them. But I had missed for a number of years the first component of this, and had not traced it through Hebrews 11 as much as I now am privileged to do with you this morning. I want you to notice the first statement in Hebrews 11. Faith is the substance of things, notice, hoped for, the evidence of things, these two key words, not seen. As you go through this chapter, you're going to see men of God who trusted Him to do things they had never seen done before. And I'll talk to you at the end of the message about how that relates to even our modern work for God. But you just start noticing the very first example He gives in verse 3. Through faith we understand the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Now, there wasn't one single person that's represented here this morning that was present at creation. I didn't see it happen, did you? None of us saw it take place at the moment it was taking place. So what's the only way we could know that it really happened the way this book says that it happened? Well, let me just ask you a question. As you look at God's creation today, and you see the evidence of design, and you think about the human body and the complexities thereof, and the watch that I'm wearing on my wrist, and you could just go down the list and look at all these different aspects of God's design, you know that someone very, very powerful had to do that. I didn't have to be present when this building was built to know as I walk into it today that someone built it. I didn't have to be present when certain things were mounted on the ceiling and this PowerPoint projector was pointed in this direction, and I suspect somewhere back there's a screen that would, it's almost as if someone did that on purpose. Well, of course they did. And you and I don't have to have been present to see something happen to know that someone had to do it. A footprint had to be made by someone, and this creation had to be made by someone very, very powerful. And I didn't have to be there to see it happen. Notice, if you will, please, in verse number 6, without faith it's impossible to please Him. He that cometh to God must believe that He is, and that He's a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. Keep that in mind. Our last message today is going to focus on that aspect of being God's man, one who diligently seeks Him. Not for a while, but diligently, forevermore. And then we get to this example of the not seen aspect of Hebrews 11. Look at verse 7. By faith Noah, being warned of God of things what? not seen as yet, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world, became heir of the righteousness which is by faith. Question. When God said, Noah, come here, I want you to make an ark of gopher wood. I want you to make it this long, this broad, this high. I'm going to destroy the world with a flood. Could Noah say, I remember the last time you did that, God? Yep. I remember reading about that or hearing about that, how you told someone to make a boat and that they should get as many people on board that boat as possible that would repent, and I'll do that. I'll do exactly what you said, because I have a reference point for this having been done before. You know, it's possible, for all we know, that it had never really flooded or rained that much prior to the global flood about which we read in the book of Genesis. And so let me ask you a question. How did Noah know that God was really going to do what God said he was going to do? How did he know that? The Bible says these were things not seen as yet. Noah believed them and prepared the ark as if he had seen it happen. He trusted that God would make it take place. Look at verse 8. Abraham, come with me. I want you to go out into a place which you should after receive for an inheritance. Look at the last phrase of verse 8. He went out, and he went out not knowing whither he went. He doesn't even know exactly how this is all going to unfold. He's walking in an area that God is leading him, and he doesn't know exactly what the next stop is going to be. He's engaged in the realm of the unseen. If you drop down to verse 11, I know he'd never seen this happen before. Through faith also, Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered in a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Can you imagine this conversation? Abraham, you're going to have a baby. Now, I've been telling you this since you were 75, and it hasn't happened yet. And a lot of us would have done what? If God had started telling us something when we were 75 and a quarter of a century had gone by and it hadn't happened yet, what would our tendency as human beings perhaps be to do? God, you've been telling me that for a quarter of a century. It still hasn't happened. I'm not sure it ever will. But faith says, God, if you said it's going to happen, I believe it will. I completely trust you. I know that you don't lie. And so if you told me it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Did Abram say, God, I'm 99. I can't have children at my age? No. Now, Sarah, she had some doubts within her that God had to work with. But I want you to notice Romans chapter 4. This is a beautiful text to show you God's man is a man of faith. He's a man that says, God, if you said you're going to do it, I believe you are. Even if I've never seen it done before, I believe you're going to do it. In Romans chapter 4, look at verse number 17. As it is written, this is God talking to Abraham, I've made thee a father of many nations, before him whom he believed, even God, who quickeneth the dead, and watch this, calleth those things which be not as though they were, who against hope believed in hope, that he might become the father of many nations. And verse 19, being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body now dead when he was about 100 years old, neither yet the deadness of Sarah's womb. He staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but here's God's man. He was strong in faith, giving glory to God, and being fully persuaded that what he had promised, he was what? Able also to perform. Abraham, what makes you think you can have a child at your age? Well, now there's a couple down the road from us. They're in their 90s. They just had a baby. Is that what he could say? Could Abraham draw from any point of reference around him and say, well, they did it, so I know it's possible because I've actually seen it happen? Abraham, have you ever seen a couple in their 90s, one of them being almost 100? Have you ever seen someone that old bring forth a child? Have you? What would the answer have been? I never have. Abraham, do you really believe God can do something you've never seen done? Yes, I do. Why do you believe? Because I spell my God with a capital G. And if God said he's going to do it, I trust him. I know he can. Fast forward, Isaac is born. He grows up to a sufficient age to carry wood on his back. And Abraham is told by God, Isaac, the one you waited so long for, I want you to take him up into the land of Moriah. I want you to kill him. Offer him as a sacrifice. What would you have been tempted to say? Especially when this son of promise doesn't have any seed yet to carry on the promise of the seed, that through your seed all nations of the earth will be blessed. Well, Isaac doesn't even have children. God, you want me to kill him? Oh, there goes your promise. But wait a minute, that's not the way Abraham reasoned. I want you to zoom in on Hebrews 11 and verse 17 and see this. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, tested, offered up Isaac, and he that received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Do you know why Abraham was willing to go ahead and put Isaac to death at God's command and didn't argue with God about whether that would nullify the seed promise? Verse 19 is amazing to me. Accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. Can I ask you this? Start in Genesis 1 and start going Genesis 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to Genesis 21, prior to the instructions received in Genesis 22. How many recorded resurrections from the dead do you and I read in the first 21 chapters of the book of Genesis? How many times do we read about anyone being raised from the dead? How many? 0. Okay, Abraham, if you've never seen someone raised from the dead, what makes you think it's possible? What makes you think God could do that when you've never seen God do that or anyone do that? I spell my God with a capital G. And if my God is powerful enough to make this universe and to make everything that is a part of this universe, I know if he can make a man from the dust of the earth and breathe into him the breath of life, I know he could take a man that died and make him live again and breathe again. I trust God. And he promised that Isaac would be the one, and so if he wants me to kill him, at some point in the future, God will raise him up, and Isaac will bear seed, and God's promise will come true. He had that much confidence, even though he'd never seen it happen. Now take the next example there, Isaac himself, verse 20, Hebrews 11:20. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, watch this, concerning things to come, things that hadn't even happened yet. He's telling them at the end of Genesis, all right, here's what's going to happen in your family, here's what's going to happen in your family. Isaac, do you really believe that? Yes. Jacob does the same thing with his boys. And verse 21, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and gave them promises that would happen to them. And then look at Joseph himself in verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when he died, and this is fascinating, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. This, by the way, is astonishing because at the time Joseph predicted the Exodus, they weren't even in Egyptian bondage yet. You're predicting something that's going to happen, and the bondage that's going to have to precede it hasn't even happened. What makes 215 years after Joseph made this statement, 215 years after it came to pass? How in the world did Joseph know that they would be leaving Egypt, and how did he know to command them to take his bones with them when they left so that he could get a proper burial back home near his folks? He trusted God to do what he'd never seen done. Could Joseph say, I remember the last time the children of Israel were in bondage to a major world power, And I remember what God did that time. And so based on that past event, I believe God can do it again in the future. He had no point of reference from which to ever think that God is capable of doing something like he would do in delivering them from Egyptian bondage. He just trusted God and spelled his God with a capital G. Notice Moses, verse 23. Moses, when he was born, hid 3 months by his parents. They weren't afraid of the king's commandment. And Moses, when he got old enough to make his own decisions, verse 24, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And he made a deliberate choice. God's man does choose to do what is right instead of what's sinful and pleasurable. He said he chose, verse 25, to suffer affliction with the people of God rather than enjoying the pleasures of sin for a season. And see if there's any invisibility factor here. Watch verse 26 and 27. Esteeming the reproach of Christ something that was not yet seen, greater riches than treasures in Egypt which he could see. By faith, verse 27 says, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is what? Invisible. And Moses, have you ever really seen God like you've seen the treasures in Egypt? I mean, you can see with your own eyes the treasures that could be yours if you stay in Egypt. And yet this God you are leaving all of this for, you've never seen. Now think about you and me, and let's try to modernize this application. You and I can see material things. We see them. And what would make us be willing to put those on the back burner of importance and to put a God whom we've never seen first and foremost in our hearts? Why would we do that? Have you ever seen God? No man has seen him at any time. John 1:18 tells us the Father is declared by Jesus, but no man's seen God in his full essence of who he is. So tell me, if you've never seen God, and have you ever seen someone that's been raised from the dead? Do you really believe the resurrection is going to happen? Do you believe that? I mean, do you know it? You've never seen anybody raised from the dead, have you? No, I haven't either. Well, what makes you so sure that's going to happen when you've never seen it happen? Think about the first time it ever did happen in human history. You can read about it in the Bible. This had to be astonishing. And you think about Jesus, his death, resurrection, he died no more after his resurrection, and that's astonishing to the utmost. And so, Moses, what makes you think, look, I trust God, and God has never let us down. I believe him. In fact, look at verse 28. Here you are, put yourself in Moses' sandals, and the 10th plague's about to happen. And Aaron and Moses are called by God, and God tells them this. Okay, here's the deal. Tonight, I'm going to send power through Egypt that will take the firstborn away unless you take a male lamb of the first year on the 10th day of this month, the same month, and you keep that male lamb of the first year without blemish, and you keep it till the 14th day of the same month, and you kill it in the evening. And then if you take the blood and you strike it on 2 of the side posts and on the upper doorpost of the house wherein you're eating the Passover, then if all of that has happened, I won't kill the firstborn in that house. That firstborn will survive. Now, picture yourself as one of the children of Israel. Moses and Aaron come to you and say, we need everyone's attention. There's a plague coming. There's only one way to escape this plague, and here it is. You need to take a male lamb of the first year without blemish, and you take it on the 10th day. You keep it till the 14th day. In the evening, you kill it. You put its blood on the 2 side posts, the upper doorpost of the house wherein you eat the Passover. And if you do that, your firstborn won't die. How many of them could say, yep, we remember the last time we did that, yeah? Last time we did that, it worked fine. It worked out just like God said, and even though there doesn't appear to be any connection between blood smeared on a door and why a firstborn would live or die, we remember that God told us to do that one other time, and when we did that, everything worked out fine. So sure, based on what we know has been done in the past and how this worked in the past, we'll do it this time. How many of them had ever heard of such a plan before? And yet what does Exodus 12:28 say? They went away and did as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, so did they. They trusted God. God's man says, I've never seen that done, but I believe God's capable of doing it if he says he's going to. Look at verse 29. Here they are at the Red Sea, and the Egyptians are in hot pursuit, and they're hemmed in. Freedom's on the other side of the Red Sea, but here come the Egyptians. We can't take 1 million plus folks down into the Red Sea and swim across to the other side and get all of our beasts and children and everything across to the, no. So there's only one hope, and that's God. Moses takes that rod, he strikes it, the Red Sea parts, the land is dry by God's divine power, and then they're told, cross through the water. Now, according to Exodus 13, there were walls of water on each side of them that they would be walking through and surrounded by walls of water on each side and a cloud above them, like a baptism. They were covered over, surrounded by water. So let me ask you a question. How many of them could draw from their human experience and say, you remember the last time God parted waters and we walked through them and everything worked out fine that time? The waters didn't collapse. And so based on the fact that God did this before and it worked out well that time, that's why we're going to walk down into this area and trust God to no. They had never seen something like this transpire before. They had no way of knowing that it could work. They just had to what? Trust God. And they did. And so sure enough, they get through, they get to the other side, the waters collapse, the Egyptians don't make it across, and they were saved by their faith and their actions and their trust in God. And then verse 30, Hebrews 11. Okay, you've wandered all this time. It's now time to take the city of Jericho. You're waiting breathlessly for the battle plan. Have we been given the military strategy yet by which we're going to take and conquer Jericho? Yeah, we just received the military orders. Okay, how are we going to do this? What's our strategy? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk around the city once a day for 6 days. On the 7th day, we're going to walk around it 7 times. And then we're going to blast the trumpets, and then we're going to shout, and when we do that, the walls will fall down. We'll just go right in and take it. How many of them could say, remember last time when we did that, it worked fine? Yeah, sure. Remember we walked around that city, we blasted the trumpets, we shouted, walls came falling. These are thick, huge, humongous walls. And what connection could there possibly be between walking around the city a certain number of times, blowing trumpets and shouting? How does that make a wall fall down? Had they ever seen anything like they were being told to do happen before? Yes or no? What does God's man do? He says, God, if you said that works, I trust you. I don't know as much as you, so I trust you. I take you at your word. Faith takes God at his word and does what he asks us to do. And so they went around the city, and sure enough, the walls came down when they blasted the trumpets and they shouted, and what they'd never seen happen before happened. Look at verse 32. Gideon, have you ever heard of 300 soldiers taking on thousands and winning? Have you? No. What makes you think you're going to be successful? I trust God. David, have you ever seen someone that's not militarily trained go out and fight a 9-foot, 9-inch tall giant of a man and conquer him? Have you ever seen that done? No. What makes you think you can do it? Well, I think God can do it. I trust God. See, God delivered me out of a lion and a bear's hands. I think he can deliver me out of this. I trust God. I take him at his word. Okay? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Who's that? Those are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Why do I call them Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah? Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were their Babylonian slave names forced upon them when they were taken captive. If you had to choose between being called by your slave name that was given to you by force or the name you were given at birth, I suspect they would have chosen to be Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So here they are, and they're told, if you don't bow before this image, what? You're going to burn. We'll put you in a fiery furnace, and you'll burn up. And then they actually, I want you to see, we've seen a phrase already twice today, Romans 4, we read it there, and I want to read it again with you very quickly because this is what God's man trusts and believes in. In Romans chapter 4, verse 21, being fully persuaded that what he had promised, he was what? Romans 4:21, what does it tell us? He was what? Able to perform. Go back to the book of Daniel, chapter 3, and here Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, described here as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they were in Babylon at the time these events transpired and having to go by their slave names. They were addressed by Nebuchadnezzar by their names. And you'll notice in verse 16 we're told, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said, Daniel 3:16 to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is what? Able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. Question. Tell me what biblical event had happened in the past where some of God's men had been delivered from a burning fiery furnace, and that's what Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah said, oh, you remember that time, that other time when God's men were delivered from a burning fiery furnace when they wouldn't do what the king said to do? Well, we know that happened for them, so we know it will happen for us. They did not know what would happen, but they knew what could happen, and they said, our God is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known, we're still not going to worship your gods. We're not going to bow before your golden image you've set up. Well, that really made him mad. What did he do? He heated up the furnace 7 times hotter than normal. So hot was it, the people throwing Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah into the fiery furnace were slain by some of the effects of that event themselves. Tell me, how did those 3 men know God could quench the violence of fire, as Hebrews 11 puts it? How did they know that when they'd never seen it done? They took God at his word. His resume of accomplishments convinced them. And so you will notice Daniel also. Look at the last part of verse 33 of Hebrews 11. Stop the mouths of lions. Daniel, have you ever heard of a man being thrown into a pit of lions and the lions being muzzled to where they couldn't do anything but nuzzle up against him? Have you ever heard of God's man being thrown into a den of lions and living to tell of it? Have you ever read about that happening, Daniel? No. What makes you think it can happen for you? I trust God. I just take him at his word, and I know what he's capable of based on other things that he's done. I just trust him. And then you see the last part of Hebrews 11:34. Out of weakness we're made strong, waxed valiant in fight, and then this, turn to flight the armies of the aliens. I want you to picture we're sitting inside a city, and outside the city there are 185,000 plus soldiers, Assyrian soldiers, who are just waiting to pounce on us and take our city and destroy us. Hezekiah, have you ever seen a scenario like the one that's happening here 701 years before Christ? No. Okay, what happened? You've got 185,000. Let me try to put that in perspective. How big is Neyland Stadium in Knoxville, Tennessee? Anyone know? It's over 100,000, right, in size? And a lot of other stadiums, college football stadiums, are around 85,000, correct? There's some of them that size. Fill up every seat in Neyland Stadium with a dead body, every single one. and then set up every seat in another 85,000 seat stadium with a dead body. And that is how many soldiers, Assyrian soldiers, did not get up one morning to go and fight the battle against the Jerusalem where Hezekiah was living. Now, they appeared to be goners. We can't stop these folks. They forgot, if God be for us, Romans 8:31, what? Who can be against us if God's on our side? And you see, these individuals had to realize that things they'd never seen happen before could happen if God was in the equation. In verse 35, women received their dead raised to life again, Hebrews 11:35. And others were tortured, not accepting deliverance that they might obtain a better resurrection. They had trials of cruel mockings and scourgings. They were stoned, verse 37. They were sawn in half. Now, let me just say this as I start closing out this first session. How many of us have really ever faced anything like what we're reading about here in Hebrews 11 when it comes to testing our faith? I'm not saying there are no challenges, but look, these folks here are going through some very hard things. I've never been afraid that someone was going to stone me or saw me in half with a wooden saw. It's reported Manasseh wanted to do to Isaiah, or did to Isaiah, depending on what you believe about historical information. But I know the biblical information, that's 100% rock solid. They wandered about in sheepskins, goatskins, destitute, afflicted, tormented. The world wasn't worthy of them, and yet they all had a confidence that said God was in charge and God had something in store for them. So you remember how Hebrews 11 finishes, right? Wherefore, in chapter 12, we are compassed about with this great cloud of witnesses. And let's lay aside every weight and run with patience the race set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Now, here's the application for you and me. Do you believe, I'm just asking, do you believe God is capable of producing spiritual results if we just sow the seed of the word into more and more hearts in this community? Is God capable of causing growth to come from the sowing of his word, yes or no? Can that happen? Yeah. We've actually seen it happen because we can read the book of Acts. We can see that even in hostile times, and this is why we got to be careful never to say, well, they had miracles and the world wasn't hostile to the gospel then. Are you kidding me about the hostile to the gospel part? They were killing Christians back then. You and I are generally not faced with that. So what makes us think that we can grow a church? One church, and I'll say this, and this will be where I close this first session. I went to a church in Texas to preach. I came back 5 years later to hold a meeting there again. They tripled in size. Of course, I had questions. I said, this is fantastic. What happened? They said, well, we decided that we were going to come together. At first, it started off once a month at 5:15 before our 6 p.m. service. And anyone that wanted to, we didn't put anyone on a guilt trip. We just said anyone that wants to show up at 5:15 at the building, a little earlier, and we're going to pray fervently for results. We're going to pray for specific programs, pray for specific results, and we're just going to pour our hearts out in prayer to God for 30 minutes. And that turned into something that every Sunday they had folks coming about 45 minutes before services and just praying. Different men were assigned to pray for different aspects of the work. And people were pouring their hearts out in prayer to God. And they said, we noticed something. The more we prayed about things happening, the more we wanted to do our part to contribute to those things happening and trust God to do what we couldn't do. And what can we tell you? Our prayers have been answered. Do we sometimes look at church growth as an impossible task in this day and time? Do we ever get to the point where we think, well, That'll never happen again like it did in the first century. That'll never happen again like it did from 1945 to 1965 in churches of Christ in this country. We're past the point of ever being able to grow the church that way. Look, you still spell your God with a capital G? Is God still capable of doing much with the power of this word right here? Do you believe it? I do too. And with all of us doing our part together and trusting Him, great, great things can happen. And if we're God's man, we're going to say, God, I trust you to do what only you can do, and I will do what you have asked me to do in the meantime. Thank you very much for the chance to be with you. I'm looking forward to the rest of our time here this morning.